Good morning and welcome to this webinar brought to you by IT Pro in association with Dropbox. The theme of this event is all about collaboration and in particular how to drive enhanced business value through effective communication and cloud-based collaboration. I'm Maggie Holland, Group Editor of IT Pro and Cloud Pro, and I'm joined by a great lineup of speakers today representing the analyst community, the end user community and the vendor community. There's also the opportunity for you to ask questions during the session itself. There'll be a dedicated Q&A element towards the end. There's also a poll element. We really welcome your feedback on how you find this event, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see more of in future events. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my first speaker today. I'm joined by Clive Longbottom, industry analyst and founder of QuoCirca. Clive, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Megan.
So to kick off, if maybe you could talk to me about some of the trends that you're seeing in the market under the umbrella topic of collaboration.
Yeah, I think what we're now seeing is that organisations have got to be far more dynamic than they used to be. When I had a proper job, it was a case of that there were teams that were put together and those teams would tend to stay together throughout a full project. I couldn't really understand this myself. What we're now seeing is that those teams have got to be dynamic. You want the people who can think up front, but you don't want the thought people at the end because they're still coming up with great ideas when you're trying to, dot the I's and cross the T's. You don't want those people, as Belbin would say, the completer finishers, who should be there at the end. You don't want them there at the beginning because they start to question things far too early. So putting in place the dynamic teams is what organisations are now looking for. And those dynamic teams, whereas before, historically, it was employees with a few contractors and possibly consultants in there, it's now a case of, well, we want the best skills, but those best skills, we don't want to use them, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We want to be able to share those skills with other people so that their price is appropriate to us. And so therefore, if the best skill is in Japan, we need to be able to bring that in and use it as and when makes sense. But we don't want to be paying for it for the time that we're not using it. So these teams are now far more dispersed, they're far more disparate. They're across completely different time zones. So you can't have something where it's a case of how do we all get together at 8 o'clock? Which 8 o'clock do you mean? So, collaboration is now, there is the synchronous side of it. How do we actually discuss something here and now, get a decision made very, very rapidly? But there's also the asynchronous side of it, of how do we actually build on the value of what's being shared amongst a group as time goes on.
So you talked there a bit about the evolution of the communications and collaboration landscape. Kind of how has that evolved in recent times and from both a tools and a technology perspective, and what's behind those changes, do you think?
Well, if you go back just by the very force of how we were, it all had to be on site. So you were paying for, we had to buy in the hardware, we had to pay for the stack that was on top of that, the operating system and everything else. You had to pay for the software, you had to have the people who were maintaining all of that. And then it was a case of, well, our connectivity is not that good. So we don't want too many people connecting through to it, so we only give access to certain people, and we're not security experts. Now all of a sudden the clouds come along. And what we saw was that companies such as Dropbox, they consumerized this capability to share information. It was a case of, right, so you want something, stick it up in the cloud, you can access it from anywhere at any time. And people within organizations, these individuals, acted as consumers and thought, well, this is great. Rather than emailing something to myself so I can pick it up when I'm elsewhere, let's just stick it in Dropbox. I always know that I've got the latest version. I can always deal with it as I see fit. Now, companies like Dropbox realized that consumerization was great, except they couldn't take a consumer view of it any longer. So they've had to build on the security, had to put in team capabilities rather than just individual sharing with other individuals, being able to give the organization more control over where the information is and what they can do with that information. So we're seeing a rapid maturation of that market. And I think that's where the really big change is, that it's now outside of the organisation, being managed by those who have got the domain expertise in what needs to be done with the information that's being shared.
You talked about some key things that are needed to be successful in terms of collaboration organisational strategy of collaboration, what are the other key ingredients that organisations should be adding to the mix to make sure when they're going to be embarking on a collaboration strategy or deploying tools that they get it right and they're successful?
They do need to start to identify where the strengths of all of their employees, consultants, contractors and others outside of the organisation are. So they do need to build up a means of being able to identify people, not by name, but that has got to be there, that's just table stakes. So they need to know that yes, Clive Longbottom is there, and whether I'm available or not for an immediate discussion, what time zone I'm in, so that it's not a case of, oh, I'm not sure whether he's available, but let's call him anyway on the phone or whatever it might be, and then find that you're waking me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you don't get much innovation out of me, I must say. But also, what skills do I have? And not skills do I say I have, but what skills do others say that I have? So we have to look at who else has been accessing the information that I've been sharing, whether they've used that themselves, whether they have quoted it. So building up a knowledge base, which then means that yes, when you're suddenly looking, it's not a white pages, show me all the people who say that they're experts in this area, but please show me all of those who really do have the skills.
And how do organisations, once they've recognised that collaboration is important and they need to be doing more of it or be more effective, how can they effectively evaluate what's out there? And then once they've got the technology and the tools in place, how can they measure whether they're being successful?
This is the hardest one. Whether you'll be able to get it down to pounds and pence, dollars and cents, euros and cents is impossible. That's not going to happen. But I think the way to look at it is flip the coin to the other side. What is the cost of not doing this? And what you'll see is that your competition out there in the market, if they get collaboration correct, they will be far more successful. If you sit there and just go, oh, we've thrown money at it, we've put in place an enterprise content management system which only 5% of the organisation is part of and only 10% of the information gets in there, you're never going to get very far. This has got to be democratized. It's got to be that everybody has access to these tools. Even the lowest possible task worker within the organisation, they can offer insights. One of the things that's always used within the business school type thing is with Swan Vesta matches, where it was somebody very low in the company who said, why are you putting sandpaper on both sides of the box? If you only put it on one side, think how much you'll save. And to start off with, everybody went, hardly anything. It's a matter of it's fractions of a penny per box. Yes, but you're selling millions of boxes per year. And then all of a sudden it was a case of, well, yes, you're right. So let's put in place collaboration which enables people to put forward ideas and for others to build on them, not to fight them down. It's always this thing, it's the human side which really matters, but the tools enable it to go forwards.
With that in mind then, do you anticipate reaching a point in time, however far away that point in time is, where collaboration and use of collaboration technologies is as natural and widely used in an organisation as something like the internet is today? We wouldn't think about not having the internet in every workplace. So will it be like that for collaboration?
It should be. I mean, from the human side, we're already doing it. The water cooler moments of people getting together, the cigarette smokers going outside and talking about various things. Collaboration it's a human trait. We do it whether we want to or we don't. What we now need to do is to widen this. When we're looking at the global village, we need to make sure that we know who the greengrocers are, who the butchers are, who the bakers are in that global village. And that's where collaboration tools manage to bring all of this together. So the more that we can ingrain it into the way that we work, it should not be seen as being a completely separate app where it's a case of, oh, I need to open up this proprietary environment to do something with content which is being held in there in a proprietary manner. It's a case of, no, if I want to do it, I open up my normal working environment and I click on open and hey, everything is there where I want it, how I'm used to doing it.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like there's been a lot of change in recent years. It sounds like there's a lot of evolution yet to come in terms of collaboration, but it sounds like it's an exciting market to be watching from your perspective, Clive. Thank you very much for that. I'm now joined by an end user. Dr. Noam Lesham is from the University of Durham. He also heads up a rather ambitious research project called Into No Man's Land, which is very exciting from both a collaborative perspective and just in terms of the research you're doing. Thanks very much for joining us,
Thanks
Dr.
for
Leshem.
having me.
To start off, maybe can you give us a bit of a high-level overview of the expedition and research programme and what you set out to achieve and what's behind it?
Yeah, so approximately 2 years ago, a colleague at the University of London, Alistair Pinkerton, and I started thinking about this notion of no man's land, which, although sounds quite familiar, actually doesn't have a clear history, nor do we fully understand what it means for us in the 21st century. And last September, we teamed up with the Royal Geographical Society, Land Rover, and of course, Dropbox, and we left the safe haven of the library and set off on a 6,000 miles expedition, starting off in England, then going through the iconic no man's lands of northern France, tracing the route of the Iron Curtain in the Balkans, traversing the buffer zone that still divides Cyprus, and heading to the last unclaimed territory on Earth, a place called Bir Tawil, on the Egypt-Sudan border. And through this expedition, we were trying to answer a seemingly simple question of what no man's lands are and what they mean to numerous communities that live near them.
Excellent. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, it does sound like a very ambitious and exciting project. How much of the success of what you set out to achieve relied on having the right collaboration tool in place?
Yeah, the history of exploration is full of technologies that went catastrophically wrong. So for us, it was actually really important and fortunate to find superb partnerships that made it not just new and innovative, but actually easier and intuitive. You know, one of the things I try to talk to colleagues about is how the technologies that were available to us, cloud technologies first and foremost, were not radically different from the things that we do most of the time, nor were they kind of disruptive technologies. On the contrary, they were enabling us to do what we do ordinarily on an everyday basis, only easier in a more streamlined manner. So for example, if I need access to a large database of maps and archival resources, but I need it 4,000 miles away from the archive, that suddenly bridges a huge gap that existed in scholarship for hundreds of years.
So can you maybe give us a little bit of insight into ultimately what led you to use Dropbox rather than other tools you might have considered or just the wider market out there? Kind of what really made Dropbox the perfect fit for what you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, so first of all, it was a matter of the ease of the collaboration. We were really surprised by how hospitable Dropbox have been to what we thought was quite a radical idea of an expedition, and how kind of curious they were to hear more and to really think together about what our needs were as a research project, as an expedition, and how a lot of the tools that are out there can really support what we want to achieve. It was also very much about kind of familiarity and learning to translate what we do. You called me an end user. What I do kind of at home, outside the office, into a work environment. And that kind of translation was actually much easier. I called it intuitive than we suspected. So Dropbox was really able to help us kind of see what was actually already there.
So for those who weren't on the expedition with you,
Right.
It sounds exciting. I'd have loved to have been there myself to get to see all those different places. But can you paint us a picture of how you actually were using Dropbox in the field? Maybe give us an example of how it helped you in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically used Dropbox throughout our journey, whether it was to kind of communicate with our students back home and have them feedback on footage, or other resources that we were collecting out in the field and helping us kind of in the process of interpretation, or in the actual process of engaging with communities out, for example, in the Eastern Desert in Egypt. We were out basically in no man's land in southern Egypt, and we were sitting in a mud hut with a local Bedouin tribe, and we're trying to get some of the stories that they had about the border zone. But it was hard to convey to them where exactly we were talking about until Elliot, our producer, ran out to the car, pulled out his tablet, opened the Dropbox, and was able to start pulling out a whole series of maps. And suddenly there was that aha moment where we were able to use what seems pretty obvious in any other setting in order to really create a conversation. Perhaps we didn't identify it at the time as collaboration, but it was basically that.
And how did you mention ease of use and familiarity earlier on? So how did the team of researchers with you react to the use of Dropbox? Did they find it easy to get on with, get to grips with, or did you have to have an element of training?
Well, I think there is a degree of familiarity that we all have with Dropbox or platforms like it through kind of our personal engagements. However, I think that it was really revealing to try it out and to really explore what Dropbox enabled us to do. For example, to create a much more dynamic work environment for project development, for ideas, for exchange of kind of interesting potentials, and you can see kind of documents gradually emerge. So a lot of what we do is write articles, and to see articles emerge not linearly but organically out of kind of ideas exchange for us is actually quite exciting.
So do you have plans to expand your use of Dropbox in other projects, other work that you're doing?
We'd love to. Yeah.
I mean, can you see other, obviously the expedition that we've talked about is a very specific project,
right,
an ongoing research project, but can you see a wider use for Dropbox in other areas of the work that you do?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're very curious about and quite excited about is this idea of open source social science. You know, usually we have quite small groups of informants, 20, 30 people that we meet with occasionally and ask for their opinions and views and experiences. What if we could expand that to hundreds, thousands, and perhaps millions of people out there? Use cloud technology in order to invite people to contribute their own experiences, even if we don't know what those experiences are like. I'd love to hear more about people from Central America, from the polar regions, what their no man's lands are like. And I think cloud technologies enables us to really think about really the basic methodologies of social science. And for us, again, that's a huge horizon.
Obviously, the Into No Man's Land expedition is a very specific and unique use case of using Dropbox and collaborative technology. But when you were embarking on what to use, what advice, based on that insight, would you give other organisations, whether in academia or the private sector, what advice would you give them when they're looking for the right tool for their needs?
Right. I would probably say that familiarity, while not a necessity, is actually something I would highly recommend. When we're out there in the field, we need to focus on getting things done in a relatively limited amount of time with limited resources. Having the ability to use platforms that don't create new bits of kit, that don't add on new kind of luggage to carry around, but rather can be integrated as smoothly as possible into the way that we already do things, and we do things, pretty well, I hope, is really important. And I think that gradual transition, sort of using technologies, cloud technologies in this case, but other technologies as well, in order to enhance rather than transform or revolutionize, is probably what I would recommend.
I mean, your story really does show the power of cloud-based collaboration and collaboration technologies generally to break down geographic and other boundaries. So it's really, really interesting. And for the audience, if they want to learn more about the project, they can go to the website, intonomansland.org, I believe, and find out a little bit more about what you achieved. So thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
So our third speaker comes from a company that many of you will have heard of, certainly in your personal lives, if not your professional lives. I'm joined by Mark van der Linden, who is the UK and country manager for Dropbox. Thanks very much for joining us today, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
As I mentioned, people will have heard about Dropbox, but maybe to start us off, if you could share some fast facts about the company to set the scene.
Sure, fast facts. Dropbox was founded in 2007, and maybe the audience or you guys are familiar with the story, but it's one of the stories where Drew, our founder, was on a bus from New York Chinatown to Boston, and he wanted to get work done, and he forgot his USB stick. And it was one of those light bulb moments where he's like, okay, and this is a 3-hour bus ride, what do I do? There must be a better way, and the better way was the invention of Dropbox. So he wrote the first lines of code on that bus. And as they say, the rest is history.
So easy.
Well, actually, making it easy is at the core of what we do. But he founded the company in 2007. The first product was launched in 2008. And if we fast forward to where we are now, we have over 400 million users on the Dropbox platform. And if we look more closely here in the UK, over the past year we grew from 1 in 4 UK internet users using Dropbox to now 1 in 3. So it's grown into a massive platform. And I think that right now we sync 1.2 billion files every day, 4,000 edits per second. It's grown into a massive platform.
Some big numbers there. It clearly shows, how large our appetite is for collaboration and sharing information and sharing data and working with different files, different documents. So how does Dropbox define collaboration? What is collaboration to you? And conversely, what is it not?
I think listening to Clive and Dr. Noam, it's specifically what we do. Our mission is to simplify how people work together. And modern day work has become more and more complex over the years with various platforms, different operating systems, multiple devices, whether you name it from Android to Windows to Apple. And really we want to build the world's simplest, most powerful collaboration platform, one that threads together different tools, platforms, devices, and more importantly, people. And more recently, about 2.5 years ago, we launched our business version, and that business version delivers the usability that the users love and are familiar with, familiarity as you mentioned, and combines it with security that companies and IT users want and need.
So obviously you mentioned Dropbox Business there. Obviously there's different versions of Dropbox. There's Dropbox Enterprise, there's Dropbox that people might have been using in their personal lives. Can you talk us through some of the differences and maybe give us an overview of how individuals' use of Dropbox has changed over the years?
Yeah, sure. So the first product we launched is what we now call Dropbox Basic. It's a consumer version that's still free. So I encourage everyone to adopt the platform because we need to get to, of course, 1 in 1 UK internet users. And it has a limited storage functionality. And if you want more storage, consumers and professionals can upgrade to Dropbox Pro, which has more storage and more features. And as we grew this platform, more and more people brought Dropbox with their devices, such as the iPads, into work. And companies started to ask us about manageability and security and a bit more business-like version of Dropbox. So 2.5 years ago, we launched Dropbox Business. So combining that usability and familiarity with the security features that IT has. So introducing the security features. And it's got all the security features that the companies would expect built into the product, like two-factor authentication and remote wipe if somebody loses a device or leaves the company, as well as auditing capabilities. And then last November, I guess we introduced that product initially for teams, and then companies and larger companies started to adopt the platform. Very large companies with tens of thousands of users started to adopt the platform, and they had some specific needs, and we listened to those users, introduced Dropbox Enterprise at the end of last year in November. And Dropbox Enterprise has some additional product and security features, domain management, for example, allowing you to onboard the users and capture users signing up to the platform, as well as what customers are telling us is very useful, providing user insights. So we have domain insights tools that allow companies to look at how people are actually using the platform and how are they collaborating. And some of these insights have really opened up eyes in seeing that, for example, programmers are using the platform at certain times of the day, and external sharing is done between 3 and 4 p.m. with certain continents, and we can provide those insights. And there's some other features like dedicated customer success management and professional services. So it has evolved from a basic free consumer version. Everybody took it to work, and we listened to the companies introduce the business version, and more recently for the very large companies, an enterprise version.
Excellent. Accessibility and security seem to be front of mind, very high on the agenda for IT and business decision makers when they're looking at deploying most, if not all, technologies. Is it safe to say the same is true when it comes to collaboration, that those two areas are really important, accessibility and security? And maybe you can talk about how Dropbox responds to those focus areas.
Yeah, sure. So I think what's important to recognize is actually usability, accessibility and usability, because accessibility, usability in our case as well as performance actually drives adoption of a platform, and adoption is what you need in order to actually have security. Because if you have a platform that's widely adopted, both on the consumer side as well on the business side, it provides visibility of what these users are doing. So our recommendation is look for the widest adopted platform first, and of course that's we would say that, but also look for that in other new cloud-based technologies. A widely adopted platform with familiarity and that people love to use. That adoption provides security, and that security that allows you to audit and exercise control over those users. So that's first for important. Usability drives adoption, drives security. And then over the past years, we've invested massively in the platform, adding security features to the platform, as I just mentioned, two-factor authentication, audit capabilities, etc. And also, it's important that we have certified the platform against the most modern standards. So we have certifications in place like SOC certifications and various ISO certifications. And most recently, an ISO 27018 certification, which is, I think, where we're at the forefront of cloud security.
Excellent. And how important are industry partnerships? I think most recent notable ones include Adobe and Microsoft. How important are they to Dropbox in responding to the needs of users, like accessibility and security, and just more generally, how are they helping you achieve and deliver and exceed on user expectations?
Yeah, I think those partnerships are extremely important. As I mentioned, the world is becoming more and more complex. We see more and more platforms existing, operating systems, devices, as well as different productivity suites, such as Microsoft Office suite, but also Google Apps, for example, or Slack. And it's important, and what we're seeing is that if you want to effectively collaborate and work together, both internally in the organization, and what we see more and more is that people are, as what Clive mentioned before as well, people find the need to collaborate externally, so with third parties, partners, vendors, Bedouin tribes, and they use different platforms. Yeah. It's not just one size fits all in the old days where people would roll out one standard. So we need to integrate with the various productivity tools on one hand, as well as the core IT systems such as Salesforce and SAP. And we have existing partnerships. And what we try to do is to build this collaboration platform to tie these two worlds together. And I think it's working quite well. We did accounts based on the Microsoft Office files we have on Dropbox. And we have over 35 billion Office documents stored on Dropbox. And as Microsoft told us, that's the largest repository of Office files.
Wow.
And that allowed us to start this true partnership with Microsoft. So you can also edit your Microsoft documents within the Dropbox app. And the same thing with Adobe, over 18 billion PDFs stored on Dropbox, one of the largest repositories of these files. So it's very important.
Excellent. So last question then, Mark, before we move on to some group discussion. Dr. Lesham kindly shared his very, very unique and quite adventurous story of how he's used Dropbox to achieve his work and research program. Can you maybe share with us some other examples, either specific or generally, about how Dropbox is being used within organisations?
Yeah, we have some really cool. This was a very adventurous one. We have some also really cool use cases. I think. Yeah, let me think of a couple. So yeah, we added 50,000 paying business customers in the past 10 months. But there's some of them which I think are really exciting, and it ties into what Clive also mentioned. So the geographic dispersed organizations who need to collaborate in different time zones across devices. Some of these use cases are really exciting. Under Armour is a customer of ours. I think it's one of the most, or maybe the most successful sports and most innovative sports and apparel companies. And everything they do, they design, is built on top of Dropbox. So the headquarters in the US collaborates with the design studio in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, where I was born, and they collaborate with the production facilities in Asia. So everything they design is run on top of Dropbox, and we're proud to be able to collaborate with them in that innovation. And more close to home, I think what we're seeing, the work that we're doing in a partnership with Channel 4 is really exciting. It's one of those use cases where they work a lot with external parties. They have to work on production of TV series and movies, as well, and transport these large files inside and outside of the organization. So that's really where multiple platforms, external collaboration, and the performance with large files works well.
Great. I mean, it certainly sounds like no one user case is the same as another. They're all very unique, although there's some common themes that clearly go across all of the organisations that are using Dropbox specifically, and collaboration technology generally. So thanks very much for that, Mark. I really enjoyed that discussion. So talking of those key themes then, accessibility and security being two main ones. Dr. Lesham, maybe I can ask you this question first. How important were those two areas, accessibility and security? How much of a consideration were they for you when you were looking at what technology to use and ultimately selecting Dropbox for the research program?
Yeah, accessibility was extremely important. You know, we found ourselves in rather remote parts of Europe and Africa, and that required constant access to our storage devices and to ensure that what we were carrying with us was as light as possible. That was the second consideration. Security was also a major concern. You know, a lot of the data that we collect out in the field is protected by, you know, various ethics requirements that academics are obliged by. That is one of our key obligations, is to secure the data that is provided to us by various communities and individuals. They do it because they trust us, and that was a major hurdle for us to address, because I was asked that question when I told my department about our collaboration with Dropbox. One of the questions that came up is this data secure? Is this data safe? Because people are entrusting you with their stories, with their experiences, and we had to ensure that these things were really addressed in order to carry out our work. And only when we were assured were we able to move forward with that. So both of these things were really important to us. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, so Clive, I have a question for you now. You talked earlier on about the evolution of collaboration, and it's certainly changed. Even from a year ago, things have changed both in the market and in terms of the way users are adopting and using these kind of technologies. How do you see that evolution changing in the future? Paint us a picture of 5-10 years from now. What are we going to be seeing?
Even as an analyst, I try not to think 5 years out. It's fool's paradise there. But I think that, organisations don't run on technology, they run on process. But those processes can be enabled by technology. So I'd like to see far more process capability start to be built into these tools. There's a hell of a lot of metadata that's being collected as well. So being able to use that metadata more to be able to extract some of the knowledge out of the information, being able to apply greater granularity of security, being able to say this document can't be forwarded, this document can't be printed, you can't cut and paste from this document into another document. So, you know, turning it into something which is the ultimate information repository, and then through the APIs, you know, allowing the third-party companies to come in and say, we're going to turn this into the knowledge platform. So, you know, yes, we'll dump data in there. The Dropboxes of this world can manage the information, allow us to get some of the knowledge out of there, but the third parties can really build on that knowledge to add to the wisdom within a company, which makes the decisions that, you know, affect the bottom line, hopefully in the right direction. So I think, yes, a lot more process capabilities are going to be something which I'll expect to see, and a lot more of, you know, the third parties being able to say, that's a superb platform for us to build on. You know, if Dropbox tries to take it too far, it'll make a lot more enemies out there. It'll find itself competing with people that it needs to get on with. So, you know, it's working together with the partnerships that Mark's already been talking about.
What about yourself, Mark? How do you have a similar vision in terms of the evolution, or do you see a slightly different future for users?
No, I think in general I agree with Clive that it's very important for us to build a trusted, secure platform that fits a lot of users and use cases, and also we have a very open approach to our APIs. We currently have over 300,000 applications that are connected and integrated with Dropbox. So we've seen over the past years a shift where we started as a company. We started as a replacement for storing things, and then it was about people connecting multiple devices and sharing the content between these devices. Now what we're seeing is that we're being asked to connect the core IT systems with the productivity suites through those APIs and through direct integrations. But also we're seeing large companies recognizing the value of Dropbox as a platform where it's a very open platform where they can build applications on top of the Dropbox platform. There's a large publisher who's completely revamped their e-publishing workflow, as Clive mentioned it, and they've used open source tools and used modern application development tools and GitHub applications on top of Dropbox. So there's no physical connection to the app on an iPad or actually the website. It uses the API calls and stores everything on Dropbox. So I tend to agree with Clive.
Lots of exciting things to come then in the collaboration space, both
Definitely.
from a vendor perspective and a user perspective. So before we turn over to some questions from our audience, our virtual audience out there in the ether, I'm going to go to journo mode for a moment, if I may. And audience, don't forget to get your questions in. We really want to hear what you want these guys to answer. So we've talked about the power of collaboration in business and what businesses can actually benefit from if they get it right, if they embark on this strategy. But what's at stake? What's at stake for those who are taking more of a wait and see approach and sitting back and just seeing what everyone else is doing before they dip even their toes in the water? Mark, maybe start with you, and one sentence and one sentence only you're allowed to answer this question. I'm going to be hard because we've got lots of questions from the audience coming in.
Okay, a long sentence?
It can be a long sentence, that's fine, with no punctuation, that's fine.
No, I think I'm going to steal with pride with some of the things that Clive said in the beginning. I think that the speed of change in the world, and especially in the business environment, will continue to increase. And to stay ahead, companies will need to foster collaboration in order to facilitate innovation. And I think that external and internal collaboration is what needs to be fostered to facilitate innovation and for companies to be able to stay ahead.
Excellent. Over to you, Dr. Lesham.
I think higher education is still stuck in the 19th century when it comes to collaboration. There is a very centralized and hierarchical structure to knowledge in higher education. Our students are not there, and I think what's at stake for us is that we're increasingly working in a 19th century model in a 21st century environment.
And over to you, Clive.
So survive versus thrive, : those that get it, those that implement it correctly, those that carry it forwards properly, they will thrive in the market. Those that don't will find that they are struggling to survive because the competition will go straight past them. So it's as simple as that. It may sound a little bit like FUD, but I don't think it is.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take some questions from our lovely audience who we cannot see, but we will hear from very, very shortly. There's lots of talk about shadow IT at the moment, and some organisations see it very much as a threat, as a thing that can damage the business or damage the IT use in an organisation. But others see it as an opportunity to actually help the organisation do better and help bridge the divide between IT and businesses that's existed historically. What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, I think it's a massive opportunity, and if you don't embrace it, it can be a threat, and it is a threat. I mean, organizations have a fiduciary responsibility to know what's going on and where their information is going and how things are being shared. So it's important to recognize that there is shadow IT, and I think you need to have a policy around that. Having said that, I think the large opportunity in terms of shadow IT is the fact that employees, so it started the power of the consumer and consumerization. We've seen it happening with like the mobile devices and smartphones, as well as the iPads going into the workplace. Consumers know what's best for them to do their everyday job. And it's recognized in the fact that they want to innovate and they want to improve in how they work together, collaborate, improve their processes. And they have found the tools already. And some of these tools are widely adopted. That has a benefit. A, the search has already been done. And B, in terms of the having a tool that's already widely adopted, that's actually has a lot of value, because it will increase your security, because it will allow you, if you onboard the business version of these tools, whether that's us or other tools out there, you will instantly gain visibility over those users and over that adoption, and you don't have to do the training, the change management, etc.
That's great, thank you very much. Just a reminder to the audience, please continue to get your questions in. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we're really keen to get your feedback on what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see more of, how you found the speakers, and myself, but no bad comments, please. So you'll see a poll on the interface that you're watching us on right now. So please do be as honest as you can without hurting our feelings in terms of the feedback. Is mobility and BYOD stroke the consumerisation of IT and our hunger for apps and always-on connectivity fueled by the cloud, is that going to fuel the demand, the increased demand, and the growth of collaboration in the future?
Yes. One more. Yeah, I mean, the bring your own device. I mean, it comes down to the shadow IT side again as well. We talk to a lot of organisations that are highly prescriptive. They say, no, you can't do that. You can't have your own device. We're going to insist you have this. No, you can't use that tool. It's too consumer. We're going to insist that you use this enterprise tool instead. That's kind of congratulations. All you're doing is you're blinkering yourself. Your users are consumers. They will continue to work the way which they believe fits them best, and they won't be thinking at a departmental and organisational level. They're not bothered that much about the bottom line of the organisation, as long as they get paid every month. So all of a sudden you've got IT going, great, we've been prescriptive, nobody's using Dropbox, it's a consumer tool, we've insisted that they use SharePoint. Nobody wants to use SharePoint, so they find ways to work around it. They're still using Dropbox. So now, whereas before you had silos of information that were at least all in the same data center, you've got thousands of individual silos of information held in a place which you've got no idea about at all. So organizations, particularly the IT departments, and this upsets IT people, they've got to divorce themselves from the organisation. They've got to get back in bed with the actual business itself, got to understand that bring your own device and shadow IT really has impacted, and now they've got to go out there and they've got to identify what people are using. They've got to find out why they're using it. They've got to look at what it is that they're using and go, actually, this is good. It does fit in with our enterprise needs. It does help the business. Therefore, we should all embrace it. Or no, we have grave worries about what is being done here. Let's find something which is as good as the consumer wants, that is as intuitive, that does everything that they want, but fits in with our requirements. So it's getting away from the shadow IT and saying, let's make it proper IT. Let's bring it in, because it's got to underpin the business. And the IT department is, at the moment, still divorced.
I mean, that I completely agree with you that that's the case. But I mean, obviously, Dr. Lesher, maybe you can talk from a user perspective. How do you move from that theory to that reality of getting all the sides to talk together and use the technology? In your particular use case, we talked about how during the research project, users loved using Dropbox because it was easy to use, it's familiar. So is it a case of getting the people who are going to be using the technologies involved in some of the early stages of the decision making?
I think we're still, at least in the higher education sector, we're still playing catch up. The fact is that our students are using it constantly. They're using it in their everyday kind of going abouts, as well as an integral part of their education. It's impossible to imagine today carrying around a notebook for most of them, let alone figuring out where you left your notes from that or this lecture. It's all centralized. The problem is that there are, when it comes to research, there are ethics considerations that we're still not fully up to date with. We do not, or have not yet had that mature conversation about where is that data, how secure is it, questions of privacy, and really reassuring those at the top that, you know, this is happening, as you said, anyway. We have to kind of start a mature conversation about getting up to speed and really addressing and opening through those conversations the concerns that we have.
So you talked about students kind of wouldn't pick up a notepad because it's just not how they're used to doing things. You know, that's happening increasingly more as the next generations come into the workplace. They're not willing to put up with using technologies or tools that are slower than what they're used to in their personal lives. So, you know, are we headed for a collaboration showdown where users kind of, you know, will not tolerate this in the workplace anymore, and is this going to become potentially a business and an IT problem? Mark, I don't know if you have something to say on that?
Yeah, sure. I think showdown might be a bit strong, but I think that it's important to recognize that trends like consumerization and the power of consumers and bring your own device, you can't stop it. And there's another trend that actually is fueling us, and that's also fueling Facebook and other companies in our space. That's the network effect. And that means that these platforms will be continuing to accelerate in their growth. I mean, in 18 months, in 12 months, we grew from 300 to over 400 million users. And then in roughly that same period, we went, the use of Dropbox, Dropbox was being used initially in 4 million companies, and it doubled, and it's now being used in over 8 million companies. So it's recognizing that the power of the consumer, and I agree. I don't think it's stoppable.
Okay, we've got a few more user questions. This one has Dropbox in the question, so I think this one might be for you, Mark. Sure. Rachel at Strat Events asks, what is the role of companies like Dropbox in the development of accessible big data?
I think big data is a big term, and it covers a whole variety of aspects. But I think there is a role for Dropbox to play there, because we are one of the largest platforms out there, connecting hundreds of millions of users, and it's a very powerful platform to onboard and digest information, whether that's expedition information or also information from sensors in terms of Internet of Things that is also being stored on Dropbox. It's a very high performant network. There is an analytical component as part of this big data question. So as part of our enterprise offering, we do provide user insights. So how are people using and collaborating Dropbox platform? But that's what I see our current role. But there are other companies in this space in terms of analytics and storing information who have for other use cases.
Excellent. Everyone's different, and everyone has a different way of working and a different way of being motivated and getting their head around the tasks that they have to perform. So is it important to bear that in mind when it comes to collaboration and deploying a collaboration technology or strategy? Do you need to, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, so you can deploy a technology, but then you need to understand that different users have different use cases? Clive?
yes, well, I'm old and gnarly, and I've been around for a long time, and the original all-in-one collaboration type things were all based around, we've got to get it down to email. So if somebody phoned somebody up and left a voicemail message, it was how do we turn it into text and how do we send it through to email? Because email was totally ubiquitous. And it's a case of, yes, but not everybody is an email junkie like I am, and some people wanted text to voice and send it to me as a voicemail. Some people wanted video, some people wanted asynchronous, some people wanted synchronous. So it's accepting that people work in different ways. It's using things like LDAP and Active Directory to be able to identify how people like to be brought into the collaboration environment, and then making that as easy as possible for them. But you always need to be able to store the output, capture it and store it. You always need that long-term store anyway, and for those people who want to access it in that asynchronous manner, then they need to be able to get through to that store and come through. So yeah, it is allowing that everybody does work in different ways, making sure that they can work in their preferred manner in context, because obviously, if you've got a 200-page document that you're meant to be reviewing, doing text to voice as a voicemail is not a good idea, so they have to go through their priorities and use it in context. But certainly, it is a case of don't think that a document is the silver bullet that will cure everything, and that therefore it all has to be done through a sharing mechanism like Dropbox. It's bringing everything else in around that as well.
And just going back to the accessibility theme for a minute, is it also important about making the technology, so if you do opt for particular collaborative technology, let's say Dropbox in this case, about ensuring that you're making it available? I mean, Dropbox is available through a variety of ways. You can access the web, desktop version, the apps, available on different platforms. Do you think that's important, that you recognise that users are using different endpoints in which to use Dropbox and share information and folders and filed, and all those big numbers that you shared with us earlier in terms of downloads and documents stored?
Yeah, definitely. It's recognizing that everybody works in a different way, and people work on different devices. So we are available for iOS. We just launched our Windows 10 app. It's fully integrated. We are available on even on Linux. So we're available in and for all platforms from an app perspective. Of course, accessible on the web as well, and accessible through APIs and integrating into other platforms and/or applications. And as part of a typical engagement, what we usually do is we do invite the business users and talk to the business users and find out how are they actually working and how can we add value to their work and to their processes. So what devices are they using and what does a typical day in the office look like? And that's part of our engagement and how we add value.
Great stuff. I mean, there's lots of talk about the virtual office of the future. Some people are using virtual offices now. Increasingly, it's becoming a solution where the real estate costs, office costs are really high. Dr. Lesham, you certainly had a virtual office when you were on your expedition as well. So do you see collaboration tools and technologies helping the transition to a virtual office? Obviously, not everybody's going to have a virtual office, but in the future, there will be more of them. Do you see collaboration technologies helping ensure that the virtual office can be as successful as the physical office that we are used to now?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot in higher education, there's a lot of talk about the virtual university and the transition into various platforms of virtual education. That's still an ongoing experiment. What we do know is that that traditional gap that existed between our research work in the field and the process of analyzing and then the endpoint of dissemination was a very long and disparate process. And what we are seeing is that various platforms like Dropbox are enabling us to, if not completely eliminate those gaps, at least to narrow them. So what we were able to do when we were on an expedition is to use a contemporary car that had its own kind of hotspot, a Wi-Fi hotspot, in order to analyze data in those endless long drives through the desert, and not wait until we get back to the university in order to start sharing our findings with millions of people around the world and get feedback at the same time. So it really is kind of shortening those gaps in our work.
Excellent.
Just one example in the tertiary education environment is the University of Luleå in Sweden. It's fascinating going there. They don't have any lecture theatres. The students get together and they sort of decide what it is that they want to do, whether it's in the cafe, whether it's in one of their own rooms or whatever it is, and then they invite the lecturer to join them online, and they run a session there, and they can use interactive whiteboards through any device that they want and so on. So they learn at the rate that they want, in the method that they want, with the content that they want, and it's amazing seeing how well it works. And so this virtualization, even though it still has a campus, is showing how we can move forward. And when you look at somewhere like Australia, where distance learning has to take place, because if you have to wait until mum or dad gets the plane out to take you to school, it's a lot easier to just sit there and do it all online. But you can't be storing it locally and then sending it over by email, because you could lose it all too easily in that sort of an environment. So you want to store it in the cloud, so that should your machine suddenly get hit by a sandstorm, you just get another machine and all your work is still there.
Excellent. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time, gentlemen. So I'd really like to thank you for joining us and as an audience, and thank you very much, Clive. Thank you, Dr. Lesham, and thank you, Mark van der Linden. We hope you found it useful and enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.